All right. Well, hello and welcome, friends, those of you who are able to join us live, and hello to y'all who are watching us after the fact. Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, which is a program of men as peacemakers where our goal is to shape new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. These conversations help us see the inherent dignity of those around us. They help us practice collective care and responsibility towards one another, and to do it in a way that acknowledges our wholeness as humans. And so, we're excited to be back with you here each month. We choose a topic that can help men and masculine folks identify our own roles in creating safe, thriving communities. And we typically host 2 conversations about that topic during the month, where the first conversation focuses on developing a deeper understanding of that topic, and then the second one, which is where we're at right now, is typically about what are those practical steps, the practical ways that men and masculine folks can work alongside others within community to create change. Last time we did not meet, I was sick that day, and I'll invite Benjamin here to turn on your camera whenever you're able. There we go. And then Felix is having technical difficulties, so he will be joining us hopefully shortly. So remember that these conversations are a way for us to come together. It's a great way for us to learn new things from different perspectives, as well as just like we're trying to model how you, as a man or a masculine identifying person, can have these conversations with the people in your own lives. Oh, there's Felix. Let me add you in. Welcome. I was just saying you were having some tech issues. Glad you're here. We will be learning together today. We're really glad for those of you who are able to watch and tune in. And hey, maybe you're listening to this conversation on our new podcast platform. But either way, thank you so much for my friends here being here for the conversation, and for all of you for connecting with us. And Felix, are you ready to take it away?
I think so. I apologize. I had to run to my car just because there's have some issues on in the building that we're at. But today we're gonna be talking a little bit about community level conditions that currently exist that make certain people and communities to be more vulnerable to exploitation and sex trafficking. When we focus in community connected level conditions specifically, we have to consider the cultural and environment conditions that lead us or lead survivors to being exploited, regarding of how. So anyone could be, doesn't matter your gender, your social class, etc. But before we get into our conversation today, let's take a minute to introduce ourselves. And I'll start myself. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, él. And I work for Esperanza United as Engaging Men and Boys Program Specialist. I'm also part of the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Super excited to be here. Super excited to have this conversation. And super excited to be here at all. So thank you. I'll leave the space for all our friends here to continue and introduce themselves.
All right, well, I'm Benjamin Turner. I work with MAPS, Men as Peacemakers, and with MEGA for our youth in our community. And he, him, I'm really happy to be here to engage in conversation. Hopefully that could put the narrative of today's community and conditions on its head. So thanks for having me.
And hey everybody, my name is Sean Hayes, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I also am at Men as Peacemakers right now up in Duluth, and I coordinate our program called the Don't Buy It Project, and I am just, excited to be talking about this topic, which is something that we cover within our We Are All Connected curriculum that we've developed. We'll talk a little bit more about that too, but so community level conditions conditions that make certain people, certain communities more vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation. That's what we're going to jump into today. So just a little bit of information about what we mean when we say community level conditions. This is a concept that is taken directly from our curriculum, and that's called We Are All Connected, Creating Exit Ramps from Sex Trafficking into Safety and Healing. And so what we know is that recent research has shown that regardless of how a person or people get involved in sex trafficking or in commercial sexual exploitation, most people who are involved end up experiencing lasting trauma. So therefore, in order to prevent more folks from experiencing that kind of lasting trauma, our goal is to work on changing these conditions within our communities in order to shrink that commercial sex industry. So examples of community level conditions can include racism, poverty, immigration, transphobia and homophobia, and a lot of these other harms that we see happening in our communities. And another way to look at this this is a new sort of metaphor that I had learned within the last year, is imagining a highway that represents the commercial sex industry. And so community level conditions like racism, transphobia, they are sort of the entry ramps that people, the ways that folks kind of get funneled onto this highway or into the sex industry. And so once folks are on that highway, they're beginning to experience harm and violence, and that's where that trauma can start to kick in and to have an impact on them. And so when we think of how to help survivors get off of this highway of harm, we can think about these community level conditions and how they sort of end up blocking exit ramps for survivors. So survivors who want to get out of this industry, who need and want to access care, resources, and healing, we have to figure out how we can get them out and get them connected into those resources and community. So, getting a little bit deeper into our conversation here today, we're going to start off with a question. So, friends, when you think of your own community, can you describe the community level conditions that may contribute to making community members targets for trafficking and exploitation? And I'll let one of y'all start us off here.
Well, I think I'll go first. Can you guys hear me good? All right. So when I think of my own community, which is Duluth, currently in my life, I think of homelessness. I do think of the racism. I do think of even like reservations are in a lot of ways exploitative targets for that, because I think when people get into homelessness, they are a much more vulnerable population. They don't have a lot of policy strength, and they're just kind of disregarded by society in a lot of ways. So they are very prime targets to be taken advantage of, because they don't lack. I mean, they do lack the socioeconomic strength, a credible home to live in, clothes on their back. They don't have money, so they can be exploited by people who have those resources, right? And it creates a lot of potential harm for them to be taken away, never seen again, truthfully, murdered or sexually exploited, socioeconomic exploited for someone else's personal or sexual gain. And I mean, this isn't anything new, and we're still dealing with this problem even in 2024. So I think that's where I'll start.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin, for saying that. This is a great question because it also opened our eyes to see those conditions existence and also what we can do. And when I think in the Latino community, I can start with poverty. Obviously, communities normally with high levels of poverty often lack economic opportunities, making individuals more susceptible to fall in trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Also, the lack of education, lack of knowledge of this problem also keep us away of knowing about resources and how also to take action. That's probably something that's really needed, specifically also with men that need to learn those strategies and tools in order to support those survivors of human trafficking and commercial exploitation. Also, social marginalization is something that also when communities or certain groups, for example, ethnic minorities, probably like Latinos and migrants, also the LGBTQ community, they face discrimination every single day. And that put them in a higher risk to them. So that's something always to keep in mind. And also maybe other communities that I didn't mention, also to think about your community, think about those conditions that create those entry ramps to trafficking and commercial exploitation. So it's important to read, to listen, to support also organizations that work in this movement in order to be sure that nobody have to go through trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. Also, cultural norms, gender inequality are many of other ones that also affect our communities. They're challenging, but it's not till we get to a position like we are right now, or maybe our spaces that we are right now, that we can open our eyes and start understanding a little bit more how these community level conditions contribute and create the conditions to this to happen. So we have the power to change that, but it's not gonna be till we work in community and we really have these conversations that we're gonna start putting those strong steps in order to do that. And we're already doing it, and people before us also been doing it. But there's so much to do, and it's gonna take even more to end that.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for those first thoughts. Yeah, Felix, what you said there at the end, it's like I feel so grateful for all of the people who have come before us and who have been doing this work for so long. And a lot of those people taught me, and taught and are constantly teaching us, how we can show up in good ways in community. And so wanted to lift that up as well. And then for me, when I think about my community, also here in Duluth, I think more specifically to like the trans and queer community here, located here, and the work that I've done within community around organizing and advocating for folks in those communities. I certainly know that our LGBTQ plus youth are at super high rates and are super vulnerable, especially when they are, kicked out of their homes and they don't have that support at home. Maybe their family or parents don't understand what it means to be queer or gay or trans, or perhaps religious beliefs, keep them from being supportive of folks. And so we know that, like you said, Benjamin, like when folks are homeless, like there's so many more opportunities for harm to happen and for folks to come in and sort of like dangle the things that people need, like money and resources and even cell phones and things like this that we know groomers will use to like entice folks away. And I also think about the ways that the trans community in particular faces like super high rates of unemployment. It's really hard for trans folks to get hired and to find jobs that, they can build that stability in their life. And so again, it's like these factors, these community level conditions then make it like that much harder for folks to survive. And on the other side, it makes it so much easier for those people, the perpetrators, the folks who are trying to cause harm, and it just makes it so much easier for them to find those people. And then I also think about like technology and how that plays a role in how folks are able to connect and groom people, online, and that's sort of a whole new way, right? That folks are able to connect with people, and not always in good ways. And so I think kind of the first thing that we have to do is try to figure out who is our community, and like actually ask those questions of like, are we connected with our community? And if we are connected, like, have we taken the time, or can we take some time to really look closer at like, why is it that my folks in the community are struggling? Why is it that folks in the Latino community, Black community, Native communities are struggling so hard? And I think it literally always seems to be connected to one of these community level conditions. And so, yeah, like you said, Felix, it's a lot of work to try to work to like break down these systems of oppression that we see, and that folks experience daily. And just because it's a big, heavy job doesn't mean we can just let those things happen, right? We've got to actually lean in, especially as men and masculine people, following the leads of survivors and women and femme folks. But we really need all of us, to do this work and to make things better in our communities.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
Hey, babe.
I'm sorry, Felix. I think I'd like to add another perspective, and I think it's often tied to a very historical one. Because the reality is, I think the problems that we are having today regarding like uh indigenous exploitation, indigenous and reservations, that community of people are constantly being exploited, being taken advantage of, as well as the Black African experience here in America as well, right? When you put these people into communities for the sake of appeasement, right? You're not really healing the people. You're just giving them kind of little breadcrumbs, right? And so that is in a lot of ways, the hallmark of America's reality and true history is that in 2024, I'm walking in Duluth and the indigenous population, the Black population, is constantly suffering under these regimes, and no one's really doing nothing about it. They're constantly being harassed by the police. They're constantly being marked uh, for exploitation, whether it be economic, whether it be prison exploitation, or being thrown in a jail. You know, and the way like the police kind of like aids in that in a lot of ways too. You know, and so just seeing a lot of that in Duluth. Every time I'm walking down the street, it's just I see a group of indigenous folks, and I'm thinking, wow, this was your land. This was your people, your community, the land that you were born, that you bred, and that you built up. It was taken away from you by people who had no business being over here in the first place. And now you're left, being on reservations and being stuck on the streets, living in shelters, and or sleeping in like skywalks and all that stuff. So I think we have to consider the historical perspective on things and the historical truths and inhumane reality that these people are constantly being affected by that, even until now. So I think narrative and language often plays at that too. We're not really mindful of the disposition that words often play into people's lives and how a group of people are often impacted by that, even 450 plus years later. Hell, even 60 years ago, blacks were Negroes, blacks were niggers. Excuse my French, but that's the truth, you know? And the reality is, black people still and indigenous people are still seen as less as human today, even more now than ever. And so, we have to really consider the historical apparatus on things, and really take that into context.
Thank you, Benjamin. Absolutely. By addressing obviously these conditions, community level conditions through education, I think also economic empowerment, social support systems, and effective law enforcement, we can help mitigate a lot of these problems and hopefully end, trafficking and exploitation, because it's really hard to listen, what our communities go through and how we allow to this to happen. So it's very important to also let the people that are listening to know that we have that, but through it, like I mentioned before, through education, economic empowerment, support of systems, especially so in the social aspect, it can make a huge difference. So thank you both of you for enlightening us with all your knowledge. So it was very powerful. So I'll make the second question. So the second question will be this. Okay. Uh, Within our work to prevent violence, we talk normally about how important it is to increase community connectedness in order to build safer and more resilient, thriving communities. So, how we can use community connectedness to start breaking down these community level conditions. That's the challenge. So, how we can use our community connectedness, that connection that we have between each other, regardless of where you're from, etc., to start breaking down these community level conditions. And I'll leave it there.
You want to jump in, Benjamin? I think we
Oh,
both.
no,
You go first.
No, you go first. I'll give you the merit.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a tough question, I think. And I think, Felix, you mentioned education and awareness raising. I feel like that is key. And I was also thinking, I feel like even before we can try to begin educating people about these community level conditions, about, the realities of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, really before we can, or I think before people are willing to listen and to be open and to learn about those things, I think that we have to be building relationships first with those people. And it makes me think back, I was just sort of rewatching some of one of our previous conversations where we had David Mattson come in, and he was sharing a story about some snowmobiling buddies, that he got connected with years ago, and he talked a lot about that, about how, he didn't know any of them to begin with, and there were comments that would be made, and he didn't really feel comfortable enough to call people out on those things until he had spent some time sort of developing a relationship and building trust. Because I think, many of us want to just go out there and do these trainings, and if we're trying to talk to people who there's no trust that has been built between us, then it's what's their reasoning for being open or being curious or wanting to learn about this stuff from us? So for me, I feel like, building community connectedness is sort of the first place that we start building those relationships, connecting with the people around us, and not just the folks who are in the choir, as we usually say, the people who already know about this, but the people who may have different values and who may have different beliefs and ways of moving in community. That's the challenge, and I think as adults, as, kids even too, it's hard to make friends, it's hard to connect and build relationships where folks feel really supported. We always constantly have so much going on in our lives, and so it makes it challenging, I think, to find the time to build those relationships, and yet, we've gotta, because I just sort of imagine me being up on a soapbox screaming to everyone about Trans 101, learn about trans people so that we can end and get rid of transphobia that happens. But why would anyone want to stop and listen? They're just listen to this crazy guy talking about who cares about what, And so that for me feels key. And I think that the hard part about that is, like, as always, when conflict or harm is happening in communities, we want a quick fix. We want to be able to, like, fix it and heal it. And this stuff really takes a lot of time, is what I'm learning, the longer that I am involved in this kind of work. So we have to be willing to take the time, I believe, to build relationships, especially for us as men and masculine people with more men in masc folks, because, again, we need all of us in this fight to prevent violence.
I can go next. Absolutely, Sean. I think community-based education programs are essential in order to educate our communities, to bring that information, to bring resources to our community. Also, community awareness campaigns. I mean, remember, we need to start also encouraging our community to start taking action and to creating campaigns. Could be in schools, could be by sharing a flyer. We can also create awareness about an issue that affects us all. So that's something that's very important. Also, we need to always keep in mind to listen, obviously, the survivors, and build support networks that so community can have a place to go to, to heal, a place where they can earn tools, get those resources needed to strengthen, the communities that been exploited and also that been trafficked. Promoting gender equality, we need to be sure everyone is listened, and through gender equality we can address, all the issues that the LGBTQIA2S community plus go through, also the Latinos, Asian, African community, everyone. So no one is left behind. So those are some of the things that are very important. Also, be present. Go to the Capitol. Community policing. Be sure that those people that are working in laws, they also understand there are a lot of communities out there that need to be taken in consideration, that there's certain policies that can support other communities and leave behind others. So it could be a little bit complex, but when we work together, when we work, in community, we can be sure to address a lot of those issues that cause so much harm. So by leveraging community connectiveness and mobilizing collective action, communities can break down these conditions that allow trafficking and exploitation to exist. So there's a lot of resources. I think we just need to work together. We need to make community and listen to those leaders out there that are taking action so we can be more productive and make a bigger difference in our communities.
I think I don't want to be aimless in my talk when it comes to this kind of thing because it's a very open-ended question, but also it shouldn't be something that has to be compartmentalized. I think it has to be like almost like abolition in a sense. It has to be an ongoing process that's constantly being revised, that's constantly being trial and error, and constantly being put forth into action. And so it's I don't know. I wish I had a straight up answer, but the truth is I really don't. Just being honest as a man, as a human, um, because I do realize in my experience of 32 years of life, me hailing from Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City, uh, in that world, I consider it a world because Chicago is like its own universe. It really is. Um, there is a pick and choose political thing. There's a pick and choose social economic thing. Humans there are often seen better than the next. And what I mean by that is like me growing up and where I was from, uh, my school was really poor, 3,000 plus students. Um, and then you go to an all white school, because I was on a football team, they had an A, B, and C team. They had a college campus, a middle school campus, and a grade school, like all on one huge like compound. And you're looking like, wow, why don't we have these kind of things at our high school? You know, we have metal detectors, we have police units who are RSOs. It will literally be like equivalent like you're walking to an airport to travel somewhere. That's what my high school was like. And so I think it may have to be a local thing where you have to kind of like shove the truth in people's faces to get them to listen. Sometimes simply just putting out a flyer and doing this and doing that is kind of like, I'll be real, like about civil rights marches. I think they're played out. I'm sorry, but it's true because how many times do Black people have to constantly remind America that we matter, that our lives are not simply seen as just some kind of existence? We have human rights, we have civil rights, we have legal rights, we have we should have the ability to live in your places of life and of restaurants and have the same jobs you have. We shouldn't have to constantly remind you that we want to go home at night, you know? But here we are in America, thinking that other lives do not have the legal reciprocity or the humane reciprocity as, white counterparts or, Asian counterparts or whatever it is. So I think like we have to kind of, I don't know, maybe just really try to shove the truth in his face. And because, 2020 was the hallmark of like civil rights and human rights and all that stuff. But now we're in 2024 and that part feels like almost like a bygone era. Like it was just a trending counterpiece, you know? And we shouldn't have to consider human rights and civil rights just some trendy topic we just shove, into the compartmentalization because it's fancy and it's trending. Human rights should always be an ongoing process, such as abolition of these systems that are demonizing and hurting people and destroying people's lives. ICE, immigration. Um, you know, People come to this country because their countries are being torn apart by U.S. interference or whatever the hell it is. Hell, even Black life and Indigenous life is still being impacted. But what are we doing about that? Just throwing some band-aids on the situation, thinking that this is going to go away. It's not. We have to face the truth, and we have to face it in a local way because we are all one people, and we have to really figure this out. And if we don't, we're going to end up in the same place over and over and over again, and it may get worse next time, until we actually deal with the reality and truth of of these uh of these moments in time. So yeah.
Yeah, I just really want to appreciate you there, Benjamin, just for how you started and just being like, I don't know, because that is a part of these kitchen table conversations. Like, we don't know all the things, and we are constantly learning together, as we have these conversations. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, we have to, consider the historical pieces of this, like when first contact and colonization began hundreds of years ago, right? And white supremacy came through, patriarchy came through, thinking about who is this country designed for, who are the systems designed to help, and who are they not for, and I think that's something we heard a lot. Felix and I were at a conference last week that was put on by MUSAC, the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and we heard that constantly, that the systems, people talk about the systems or these community level conditions being like broken, or they will talk about them being like designed to work exactly how they're working and to continue to harm and push aside folks who do not have that power and privilege within our communities. And this local thing that you're bringing up, Benjamin, too, definitely resonates because, if I look at my trans community here versus like in the Twin Cities even, like that's a 2.5 hour drive, but like I think that the issues would look really different. And I think that's something that we've learned over the course of doing this work, and even back, a couple years ago when we started these kitchen table conversations, it was like there isn't just a one Band-Aid solution that will fix for all communities, because there are nuances and there are differences in how we experience violence and how it shows up. And so I think you're absolutely right that, like, what would work possibly in Chicago is not going to work in Duluth, Minnesota, right? And we have to gather these people, right, who are committed to making change, and then, like, sit down and look at the community and be like, okay, how can we begin? What's that first step? How do we begin to start addressing these community level conditions so that our future descendants, our youth, Benjamin, you work with our youth, Felix, you too, these youth are depending on us and our elders, to kind of clear the path for them. And so, yeah, it's such a huge, gigantic problem that's been around since the beginning of the world, violence and sexual exploitation. And like, we can't allow it to overwhelm us or freeze us. Like, we have to keep figuring out, like, what those next steps are. And actually, that kind of leads perfectly into our final question for today. So we sort of have been touching on this a little bit, but so, our second conversations of the month are typically focused on, the whole hour is focused on how do we take steps, whether they're big or small. What are these practical things that we can be doing day to day in our communities and in our lives? And so I'd love to throw this out there to y'all. So what are some practical steps or actions that men can take right now to start working towards this future that we're all committed to building together?
And I can start. I think what Benjamin say about education is, I think it's essential. I think we all need to educate ourselves, and also, even when we, like Sean and I were here, having discussions or having a conversation about this topic, that doesn't make us professional or that we know everything. Every time I go to a conference, I normally go very excited because I already know something about it. But when I get to that conference and listen to the stories, listen to the survivors, I realize that I don't know nothing. There's so much, to learn in order to be a more effective ally, to be a better supporter, to be a better brother, to be a better husband, to be a better everything. So through education is obviously one of those actions that we can take in order to address those issues, that they're causing so much harm. Also, like I mentioned before, challenging harmful gender norms, speak against about those people causing harm, talk about colonization, talk about all those things that affect us and continue affecting us even after many years, genocide, everything. So we're more aware and we don't keep repeating Benjamin say, we can see how they're burning, like they burned books, the Nazi in Germany. Also, now in Florida, they're banning books about history, of Black history. Why we keep repeating the same things when we already know there are people taking advantage? They're doing these things in purpose. I mean, we need to battle these systems. We need to work together. I understand that systems see us as a minority, specifically the BIPOC communities. But if we just think about this, if we put them all together, we can make a huge, huge difference. And we wouldn't be considered anymore like a minority. But we need to work together. We need to sacrifice things. We need to listen to other communities and find, a middle ground where we can use our strengths, to do this. And this doesn't need to be done by one person. I mean, this is something that I learned from MAP and from this curriculum. We all have gifts. We all have strengths that when we put it together, remind us that we don't need to do this together. So I can do something. Sean can bring another of his strengths, everybody. Benjamin can bring also his. So we can do that. But at the same time, we need to support survivors while we do this, understanding their stories, listen to their stories, understanding as men where's our role to play, so we can not continue causing harm. Those are some of the ways that we can probably address some of these things. Also, being an active bystander. You know, I think a lot of the problems that I see in my communities sometimes is that we're silent because we're a migrant community. Some of our communities undocumented. We think that we don't have a voice, that we don't have a role to play, and we tend to isolate ourselves, and that makes us more vulnerable also to fall in human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation and labor trafficking. There's so many things that make us more vulnerable, but also as a person that's trying to be make those first steps, we also need to understand our privilege. You know, the privilege that we bring to the space, so we're aware not only about us but about, you know, what other people are going through. When we understand what they're experiencing and what they're going through, is what, at least for me, give me the power and the energy to say, you know what, I need to do something. I need to support my community because we're all connected one way or another. The decisions that I make, the actions that I make, it may affect, you know, the African American community, can affect, you know, the Asian community. It can affect us all. So we also need to be aware. And I know sometimes that's kind of scary because I want to help, but I don't want to cause more harm. So come with a big with an open heart, you know, be vulnerable, be open to learn. And also when you're called out for something that you said, you know, also make those changes so that doesn't happen. Also have that conversation with other men so we're a better role models in our communities. And the curriculum that we work in with MAP is how we can become better role models. When I started doing this job in Minnesota, I'm a father of two daughters, and I was thinking how I can support my community, how I can do this. Are there other Latino men doing this work? And they're not. I'm probably the only one doing this work here in Minnesota. So that for me is heavy, you know, because being seen as a leader, it brings a lot of responsibility on you. That's something they're willing to take. But I'm a human being. Right now, I feel burned out of all the stuff that I'm doing from not only human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, but the work that I do in school, the work that I do with community. And the same way I understand that I don't need to do this alone, I also need to have this conversation in schools and spaces with the Latino community so they can understand they also have those strengths. They also have, you know, what is needed in order to push this movement and to make a difference because we all have that capacity. We don't need to wait till my daughter or my son is trafficked in order to take action. We need to, you know, work on prevention, something that's very important. So doesn't matter how big or small, we're trying to make a difference. It make a huge difference. Also supporting organizations like Men and Peacemakers are already doing an amazing job. You know, just contact them if you want them to go to your community and talk a little bit about these topics because they're very important. And through probably bringing organizations like MAP, probably like us, it can provide that strength and that support system needed in our communities to understand that they're not alone and we have an amazing, beautiful communities that can make a difference if we really want to end commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking.
Well, so this is a word I would like to kind of throw out there that I think is a very powerful word: impact, right? And so MAP is in a very shifting place. I will want to say we're in that transitional phase, and we're trying to springboard ourselves into visioning what is MAP going to look like, and how are we going to integrate ourselves better in the Duluth community, right? And so, um, I guess the question is like when we invite people to the table, whether it be other board members of certain organizations, um, certain communities or school boards or admins, whatever. The question is, uh, I think should always be, what are we doing? And second, when we make these decisions, these policies, these whatever these things are, whether it be from the Congress perspective or the Senate or the Republicans or the Democrats, the question is, when we do these things, make these things, who are we impacting? Because I think that's where we are in America, or even in local Duluth. The things that we're doing, who are we going to impact when we make these things? Is it the trans community? Is it the Black community? Is it the white community? Is it the indigenous community? Is it the small Asian community? It's yeah, so I think we have to be mindful of the things that we do in the here and now, because we as adults, we have a collaborative responsibility and undertaking to be impactful in the best ways possible for all people, for all nationalities, origins, people in socioeconomic conditions. And so, yeah, I think impact is the word I would want to relate to you, something that we have to think about moving forward. Because if we're not being impactful and we're not thinking of the people we're going to impact, you know, like I said, we're going to have these same problems over and over and over again. So I think by inviting people to the table and try to get on one accord and really try to, hey, let's go to the Washington Center, let's go to the Freedom Center, let's go to the Damiano Center. Let's find a way to extend our impact to our youth, our community, our homeless population, whatever it is, because everyone really does matter in this community. So we have to be mindful of the impact that we have and the things we do to create the impact.
Yeah, dang. That's a great question. Who are we impacting? And yeah, I don't know that many of our leaders and politicians and folks historically have really asked that question before. They've passed different legislation that's supposedly going to be helpful and supportive to folks, but what is the bigger impact? And that's such a good question. And I mean, when I think about steps, big and small, like, that made me think of like registering to vote and voting for candidates who support diversity, equity, inclusion, who support our houseless folks and who want to bring affordable housing to our communities. And so it's like there's so many different ways that folks can have an impact, whether it's big or small, but like registering to vote and voting for people and learning about the people in your communities who are trying to hold those positions and asking those questions of them of like, how are you going to support our trans community and our queer community and our Black and Latino and Asian communities, right? And how are Native folks going to be supported through your legislation? And so asking those questions and being an educated voter, I think, is a small way that any number of people could do, individuals. I also was thinking about my kiddo and how, something that seems really small to me right now is the fact that, her mom and I have always tried to make sure that her books and her stories that she has are diverse and that they come from many different cultures. And so she's starting to see people of color, BIPOC folks, Native folks, all different kinds of people and families. And so I think that something as small as that, like that is setting the pace or setting her up, I believe, I hope, to come out and to grow and to learn and become an adult who then, has a little bit less work to do on herself and can get out there and can be making changes in her own ways too. But, talking about consent and bringing in diverse perspectives, I think early on with our kids is just gonna like have a huge impact, I think, on our younger generations. And then I think about people my age who I think about family members who would say racism is not a big deal, it doesn't have that big of an impact on people, and people can just go out and get hired and there's no impact from racism on that. And what's my role in that? Like, I have to be able to step forward and be like, hey, actually, as another white guy who is in relationship with people of color, who has learned, who has had many years of people teaching me the experiences and and how racism shows up in so many ways in their lives, then I'm able to share some of that, right? And hopefully move that dial a little further for the folks who, we might say are against the work that we do. Ultimately, I think all of us share some value of some kind, whether it's love for our families or respecting people as they are. I mean, I think we can connect over these shared values, but we have to be willing to have those conversations, whether it's Felix talking to somebody in his community about trans folks and our experiences because he learned a little bit from me, or vice versa with me talking about some of the experiences with the Latinx or Latino community or the Black community. We have to be willing to share what we're learning too, because again, I think the ripples of that go out and extend a lot further than we know.
Thank you, Sean and Benjamin. I think it's really awesome to listen both of you. By listening to Benjamin, remind me. I listen to his deep voice and remind me Serrano. I know it's in New York. We miss you if you listen to this Serrano. So I hope you and your family doing well. But yeah, it also made me think about the impact, who we're trying to impact. The first thing that came to my mind was right away, we try to impact everyone. And of course, that's the goal, but we need to be strategic too at the time that we're doing this work. We need to be sure to address those individuals that are causing the most harm, but at the same time, working with the whole community. So thank you for bringing that up, Benjamin. I think that was very powerful and super excited about this conversation. So, uh, thank you. Thank you again to all of you who join us on the conversation today. And as a reminder, we are holding these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Time. So join us for our next live conversation. The next one may take place on May the 2nd at 12 p.m. Central Time, where we'll be talking about values, individual and collective, and how these values impact our work to prevent violence and exploitation.
Yes, also want to throw a big thank you out to all of our folks who've tuned in either now or later. We're so glad to connect with you. Don't forget, you can follow us on all the social medias, Facebook and Instagram. You can stay connected with the Men and Masculine Folks Network that way. You can find us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you can also listen to a bunch of our previous conversations that are now uploaded in podcast form. So you can find those on Spotify or Podbean at this time. And if you are watching this conversation as a part of your virtual training for the Don't Buy It project, you can check out the description below for instructions about downloading the discussion and activity guide.
And as always, we encourage you all to have this conversation with your loved ones and the people in your communities. They can make a huge difference by just bringing the topic up in your table conversation while you're at the gym, when you're playing basketball, soccer, whatever. I think we can make a huge difference, and we can lift the voices of those that are being suffering from systems and from a commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking. So together we are building interconnected communities, and they're going to be free of violence, and also at the same time where everyone, doesn't matter your gender, where you're from, your race, we can all can thrive. So thank you, everyone. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next kitchen table conversation. Thank you. Bye.